I'm really excited that you're joining us today. Today's webinar will cover one, how digital inclusion is defined, why digital inclusion efforts are important, and the ways that you can advocate. As Angela mentioned, my name is Michaela Perez, and I'll be today's moderator. I recently joined the NDIA team as a fellow. We are a national organization, and I'm based here in California. Before we get started, I wanted to provide a few logistics. As already, Angela kind of give you an overview, but again, please feel free to use the chat box to ask any questions. If I happen to miss any questions that you post throughout the webinar, I'll be sure to address them at the end in the last 10 minutes that we have. So to get us started, I'll have all of our staff go around and introduce themselves, say your role, how long you've been with NDIA, where you're based, and a fun fact. So Paulo, please feel free to get us started.
Thanks, Michaela. Hi, everyone. My name is Paulo Balboa. I'm the manager of programs and data. I've been with NDIA since the end of July. I'm in Brooklyn, New York, and a fun fact about me is that I was born in New Zealand. So I will send it over to Sean Davis. Sean?
Thanks, Paulo. Hi, everyone. My name is Sean Davis. I am from Washington, D.C., or based in Washington, D.C., rather. I also joined NDIA at the very end of July. I am the manager of research and policy, and a fun fact about me, when I was in 6th grade, I was in the National Spelling Bee. And I'll pass it over to Miles.
Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Miles Miller. I am the program associate here at NDIA. I'm based in Phoenix, Arizona. And fun fact about me, I am originally from Cape Town, South Africa. And I will pass it on to Caitlin.
Hi, everyone. Caitlin Schwartz. I've been with NDIA for a couple years now. I am the operations manager.
And you live where?
Oh, I live in Columbus, Ohio. Very snowy today, Columbus.
And your fun fact?
Oh, I wasn't prepared. I'm sorry. It wasn't on the list. My fun fact is that I have a blue freckle. You can't tell, but it's on my cheek. And everyone in high school called me Blue because of it. There it is. Sabrina, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure thing. I'm Sabrina Roach. I'm out in Seattle, Washington. I'm the manager of strategic engagement at NDIA, and I've been here since April. My fun fact, I once auditioned for Annie in a drugstore parking lot. It wasn't a real audition. I think we've all gone, right?
Yeah, thanks so much.
I'm sorry, Angela. I thought you. Angela.
Thank you, Sabrina. Hi, I'm Angela Seifer. I'm the executive director of the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. I live in Columbus, Ohio. And my fun fact that has kind of lost some oomph over the years is that I have a black belt in Taekwondo and a green belt in Krav Maga, but that was like, I don't know, over 10 years ago, maybe even 15. So I don't know, I stick that little fun fact in my back pocket. Back to you, Michaela.
Thanks so much, Angela. Many of you might be wondering when NDIA started and what we do. So NDIA started in 2015 and was built to unify voices for home broadband access, public broadband access, personal devices, and local technology, training and support programs. We currently have about 500 plus affiliates in 44 states. And specifically, NDIA has 4 pillars. One is practitioner support, policy, awareness, data, and research. And you can find out more information and details on our website. Miles will go ahead and drop the link into the chat box. So let's get to defining what terminology is commonly used in this field. Sabrina, feel free to take it away.
Sure thing. Well, we've got a definitions page on our website that I encourage you to reference. I'm putting that in the chat right now. So digital inclusion, digital equity, what's the relationship there? So digital equity is the goal. That's the big picture goal. And digital inclusion is the how. Those are the strategies for how we get there. We created the definitions on the website with our affiliates. And just, keep in mind always that digital inclusion is an evolving field, and our definitions should evolve with it. We have a really dorky furniture joke because we have this idea of the stool or the table, and like each part, like devices and skills, etc., are different legs. But the big point there is that you need all of it for the structure to stand up, right? So we look at how to combine all of these aspects. Availability versus use of the word adoption. Availability refers to physical infrastructure, but adoption is more meaningful as a measurement because it's people focused. We encourage you to avoid the word access, like access to the internet, because it could be either one and it's just not descriptive enough. I think I'm gonna stop there. We can talk more later. Colin Rhinesmith and Susan Kennedy have done some great work with the Benton Institute on all of this, if you want more detail.
Yeah, thanks, Sabrina. So this really leads us into thinking more deeply about who's digitally excluded and why. Sean, can you talk to us a little bit about who's digitally excluded?
Sure thing, Michaela. So in terms of which populations are digitally excluded, we have urban communities, the elderly, and Black and Latina populations. More importantly, the group that is most digitally excluded are those that are low income. This includes 10 million low income households, of course, low income being those that make less than $25,000 a year annually, and these U.S. households do not have a computer or tablet in the home, and this population makes up over half of the U.S. households without a device of any kind. So when we think about why these populations don't have internet access, the chief reasons why they're digitally excluded are affordability and availability. I think Sabrina kind of touched on why the access piece can be a little dicey, and affordability and availability strike a little bit closer at the heart of why communities do not have internet access. For most households, standard high-speed internet access is either too expensive based on the providers in the area, whereas for others, internet service providers have not built the infrastructure necessary to even make wireline internet access available. Based on data from the American Community Survey, 36 million households in urban areas are without wireline internet access. Of course, wireline being DSL, fiber, and cable, while 10 million households in rural areas do not have wireline internet access. The breakdown for families without wireline internet access is particularly telling in terms of income. So for those that make less than 25,000, there are 54% of households that do not have internet access of any kind. When you think about those who make a little bit more, 25,000 to $49,900 a year, it goes a little bit down to 39%, and then a little bit higher, 50 to 75K a year. The number is 25% of households, that do not have wireline internet access. So what we basically see is that there's a direct correlation between income and home broadband adoption, despite internet access being deemed a utility like electricity or water. Many of the most economically disadvantaged populations go without. So back to you.
Yeah, there's a lot of conversation about redlining and digital redlining. Paulo, can you define redlining and digital redlining and what the difference between the two are?
Sure, thanks, Michaela. Yeah, so redlining is a term that has its roots in discriminatory practices in fields such as banking and housing after the Second World War, and these practices were based upon historically segregating cities based on race, class, and poverty rates. So a lot of what Sean was speaking to, right, like these categories for historically underserved communities, redlining was a practice done both by the public sector and also by the private sector. Banks, for instance, by selectively raising prices to keep out or to segregate parts of major cities. When we talk about digital redlining now, we're applying that same sort of idea, but to the adoption of broadband in major cities. So digital redlining is what NDIA defines as income-based discrimination against residents of lower income urban neighborhoods and the types of services that internet service providers provide. So NDIA has done 2 major studies on digital redlining. The first major study on digital redlining was a study of the city of Cleveland, released in 2017, in which that study found that the internet service provider, AT&T, didn't upgrade its fiber or provide faster DSL to communities that were historically underserved. To put this another way, if you looked at a map of the underserved communities in Cleveland, whether they were segregated by race, class, income, that map looked the same as the map where AT&T wasn't providing its service. So there's as Sean was saying, there's a direct correlation between these categories for historically underserved neighborhoods. Earlier this year, NDIA wrote a report with the Communications Workers of America, which demonstrated that AT&T, once again, had made fiber in the home available for fewer than 1/3 of the households in its network. So just to look at an idea of how one ISP does not serve or does not adequately provide service for its subscribers. Back to you, Michaela.
Yeah, so Sean and Paula really gave a descriptive picture of who gets excluded, and this really leads into how COVID-19 has created a sense of urgency to address this issue, but also has really amplified new efforts. Miles, how has NDIA adapted to supporting our practitioners' needs?
Thank you, Michaela. So to better support practitioners as well as the digital inclusion community at large, NDIA has created several pages in response to the escalating need for information as a result of this global pandemic that we are all now facing. Those pages being the state COVID-19 digital inclusion response page, the local government COVID-19 digital inclusion response page, and the free and low cost internet plans page. And I will share my screen with you shortly so we can just have a brief look at those. So to start, the state government response page is just as it sounds. It's a comprehensive overview of what all states across the US are doing on a statewide level, including partnerships with state governments. Examples include executive orders from governor's offices, as well as state funding for digital inclusion initiatives. The local government page follows the same idea. It's an overview of COVID-19 response efforts, however, on a more zoomed in level, on a more local level. So local level digital inclusion responses to COVID-19 being city and county level as opposed to statewide. Both pages have links for each listing for the relevant information that they are talking about. So it's not simply just informative. We do have links to where we found the information as well as additional resources, and they're both being continually updated. The criteria for each page is also very similar. We look at internet access, we look at device access, including computer refurbishers operating on a statewide or local level, and we look at tech support. And then both are alphabetized just to help you find information a little more easily. And then moving on to the free and low cost internet plans page, this is a listing of internet service provider responses to digital inclusion needs as a result of COVID-19. And this goes beyond the federal level pledge that ISPs signed on to earlier this year, in that it provides additional information on what responses individual ISPs have taken to mitigate the effects of COVID-19 on vulnerable populations with regards to the digital divide. In addition to ISP responses, in addition to the names and descriptions of ISPs and the responses, each listing includes information on things like eligibility, as well as how someone might go about signing up for each of these responses provided by ISPs. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can share my screen, give you an idea about what these look like. And I believe that the links are being pasted into the chat. Right, share. I hope you are able to see my screen. So this is the state government digital inclusion response page. And if you scroll down, you're able to see our list of criteria, as well as our alphabetized list of state governments from A down to, I think it's Wisconsin is the last one, with the red hyperlink text being the links that you can click on to find out more information about what states' responses are, what they look like, where they came from, etc., how much money is behind them, and so on. Similarly, our local government page, same idea. List of criteria. We've got a link to the FCC Keeping Americans Connected pledge, which is the federal level pledge I spoke about earlier. And again, alphabetized list of all the local level responses, as well as their hyperlinks. Finally, our, that is not the page. I will go back and find it. Free and low cost, here we go. This is our free and low cost internet plans page. So if you scroll down, NDIA has created this table where we're able to click on the drop-down menu and have it provide a lot of additional information with regards to the ISP responses, where it's available, how to apply, as well as more information. Each listing has its own drop-down menu. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and swing it back to you, Michaela.
Yeah, thanks so much, Miles, for providing an overview of local responses. Sean, what is the federal government doing to support or should be doing to support?
Sorry. Thanks, Michaela. First, let me say that NDIA, in terms of our federal policy work, NDIA communicates with our affiliates to assist their issues on the ground, and then we take that data and information, confer with our colleagues in DC and elsewhere about how to create and advocate for policies or legislation that best answers those issues that our affiliates are experiencing. But to answer your question more directly, there are currently some discussions regarding a COVID relief bill. This is a bipartisan effort. However, I want to be very, very clear that this bill is not concrete yet. Again, I repeat, it's not concrete yet. There is no guaranteed bill that is happening, but there are discussions. However, if there is a COVID relief effort, the money will go through the states. So if you do not have a relationship with your state broadband agency, you definitely want to do so now. And I believe Miles or myself will be putting the link to connect with your state agency in the chat. But otherwise, we're supporting the Digital Equity Act, which was introduced in April 2019 by U.S. Senator Pat Murray. It comprises of $1 billion in federal grant funding over the next 5 years to support digital inclusion programs throughout U.S. states and territories. Back to you, Michaela.
Yeah, so this far, many of you might be already thinking, well, what are some solutions or activities to achieve digital inclusion? Paulo, can you elaborate more on this?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so this builds upon the furniture joke that Sabrina mentioned earlier. This is the 3 legs of the stool of digital inclusion. What do we mean by that? The 3 legs are affordable broadband, affordable devices, as well as digital literacy training. I'll start with affordable broadband. It's not enough simply, like, so we were talking about in the digital redlining reports that NDIA has published before, a service provider may have wires in the ground and have internet available to residents of an urban neighborhood, for instance. But what we like to focus on is this idea of adoption. How many people in that urban area have access, quote, access to the internet, but are unable to use it? Some barriers there could be income related, could be race related, etc. That's what the digital redlining reports are there to discover. So our emphasis is when we say affordable broadband, is the emphasis on discount internet offers. On our page that Miles was sharing earlier, there's a list of internet service providers that have discount internet offers, along with the prerequisites for that describe how folks can qualify for those offers. Next is affordable devices. It's the same idea. If someone has access to the internet, how do they get on the internet? This is a device, right? So an affordable device means that NDIA can tap into its network of local and national computer refurbishers, again, found on that free and low cost internet page, to get folks connected with a device that's appropriate for their skill level and also for their price range. The third leg of the stool is the digital literacy training component, tying together these three legs of the stool here. Someone has access to the internet, they've adopted it, they have a device to get on the internet, but what happens if they don't know how to get to the job searching website that they need to get to? What happens if they don't know how to connect with their family or friends on Facebook? This role of digital literacy training is the people-centered component of all of this. We're always remembering that there are actual human beings and people who are trying to use the internet, and we can't just leave them out in the cold. So that's what we talk about with digital literacy training. That's making that human connection with one another. Traditionally, places like a public library, for instance, has checked all of these boxes. They have the public computer center. They have, of course, Wi-Fi or wired internet to get folks on the internet. And they also have staff who are trained to help community members or library patrons get to what they need. That's why on our website, on our definitions page, NDIA suggests the American Library Association's definition of digital literacy. So back to you, Michaela.
Yeah, let's take a pause really quick. I see a question in the chat box for Mark Reynolds, specifically asking what change in the White House, with the change in the White House, how will these programs be affected? Does anyone know if there's going to be a pause, continuation, or restructure of NDIA and the direction? Angela, I'll hand that over to you.
Yeah, sure. So what we know right now, Mark, is that in that COVID relief bill, well, there's one bill, but then there's a couple more versions out there. So what we know is that it's possible that the final version might, as Sean was careful to note to you, it may include a broadband section, 10 billion for broadband. Of that, 6 or 6.5 billion would go to the states. And then of that money, the digital inclusion and broadband adoption are allowable expenses. So if that happens, it's up to your state. And that's why Sean suggested, if you don't already, have a relationship with particularly your state broadband office and anyone else at the state level. We will get into this in more detail during the community call. And if it does happen, the question of whether or not NDIA adjusts, I think we just keep doing what we've been doing. We'll probably it was noted to me yesterday that our services will be even more in demand. So we will do our best to have the capacity to meet that demand.
Thanks so much, Angela. So as we know, there's so many shifts that have happened due to the pandemic. Sabrina, how has the field changed because of COVID-19?
It has certainly expanded. Understatement. But to see more detail about how it has expanded, we worked with academics Colin Rhinesmith and Susan Kennedy and the Benton Institute to do this digital equity ecosystem report. So in essence, the report says many things, but we certainly know from the report that localities with digital equity or digital inclusion coalitions already had the relationship infrastructure and sort of the analysis developed so they could move faster with the pandemic. And then we know that more stakeholders from education and telehealth have shown up to participate in these coalitions. And certainly within our community. And our community has, can we safely say it has doubled the number of affiliates? It's now at 500 plus. And in April, it was maybe 250 affiliates. And also subscribers have increased. Those are folks who have some budget to be able to contribute to these expenses. So the link that I put in the chat is a blog post that sort of crunches down the ecosystem report, but here's the link for the full report. There you go. Paulo, how have digital inclusion programs adapted during the pandemic?
Thanks, Sabrina. Yeah, how have digital inclusion programs adapted to the pandemic? Well, back when COVID hit in March, places like public libraries that had a public community center and other nonprofits that were doing this sort of in-person digital literacy training, they had to very, very quickly figure out, okay, how do we adapt our programs when we have to be socially distant, when we have to be remote? I came to this work from the New York Public Library. I know this firsthand. We were scrambling in late March and early April to figure out, like, how do we continue teaching classes to our patrons? They need them. So over the course of from March through the summer, NDIA talked with our national network of affiliates. We talked to folks who were actively trying to figure out what works, what doesn't work when teaching remotely in a pandemic. Some organizations, some friends of ours, to highlight, Tech Goes Home in Boston and the Community Tech Network in Austin and the Bay Area. Just to call out a few organizations that were instrumental in getting their programs off the ground and adapting to teaching remotely. We talked with them along with many, many others, right? Not to diminish the work of our working groups. We talked throughout the summer to figure out, okay, what is working where you guys are and what's not working. What came of those conversations was an update of the Digital Inclusion Startup Manual, which is a publication that NDIA had originally put together last year pre-pandemic. Specifically, Chapter 4 in the Digital Inclusion Startup Manual, which focuses on digital literacy training, got a huge, huge overhaul to include some insights from our working group. Any free digital literacy resources that were online, we added into that startup manual. Any best practices around, like which screen sharing application is the best, depending on who you're working with. We included all of those best practices in our startup manual. Just to call out a few examples of specific examples of how organizations were adapting. Organizations like Tech Goes Home began to really build out their YouTube page with short tutorials based on subjects such as, setting up a Zoom account on a Chromebook or registering for Facebook. So we call that asynchronous, or so you can just send someone to a YouTube video and say, like, okay, here's a video that might help you out. The other thing that organizations were doing is figuring out how to talk like this, how to do Zoom all day when you have a learner on the other side. So we got a lot of amazing insights because our community is amazing and super, super smart, and put all of those into the Digital Inclusion Startup Manual. Back to you, Michaela.
I saw a question from Carolyn, specifically about how does internet via mobile devices play into the definition of excluded? How should we think about this? I'll hand this over to you, Angela, to address this a little more.
Sure. So one of the responses we often get when you're working in the field of digital inclusion is, where's my phone? Everybody has a mobile phone. There's no digital divide, right? You've all heard that before. Although I have to say during the pandemic, we do hear that a little bit less. There's a significant difference between having a wireline connection into your home that is then broadcast via Wi-Fi versus the cellular connection that comes from your mobile phone. First of all, the cellular connection is wireless from the tower, right? That's where the wires are. In your home, those wires are a lot closer. Those of us who can afford both, we do. Why do we, right? Because it's a lot more reliable. The wired version with the Wi-Fi in our home is more reliable and has more capacity than that version via cellular. So those who can't afford both, they go with mobile. So it's not a choice because it's better, it's a choice because that's all folks can afford. Huge difference also in capabilities of a mobile device versus a computer or a laptop. One of the biggest barriers to a cellular service is the data cap. So it might work for a single individual. Will it work for a whole family? Nope. So these are the things to think about when you're working on solutions. During the pandemic, we saw lots of communities go at hotspots as a solution, which is a great, like, quick get it out the door kind of solution, because you can just hand it to someone and they turn a button on and it works, which is different than, oh, we need to install the cable or the DSL or the fiber, and then we got to set up the Wi-Fi. Even though it's a quick, easy solution, it is more expensive because you have to pay for the hotspot. So it's not, so always remember that those hotspot solutions come with the monthly service, possible data plan. So watch that piece. And then they come also with the purchase of the hotspot. The other thing to keep in mind is that the hotspots or a connected device via cellular service is really valuable for our housing insecure community members. Okay, Michaela, back to you.
Yeah, Paulo, let's shift over to talking about digital navigators, what they are and why they're so important.
Sure. Yeah, so digital navigators, similar to the startup manual, was also came about because of the pandemic, and it also was informed by our network of national affiliates, right? So again, when the pandemic hit, services or organizations were trying to figure out, like, okay, how do we continue our services to our community members, maybe to our library patrons? A lot of these organizations were realizing that either you are connecting with folks virtually through a Zoom call or a Google Meet, or more often than not, because community members may not have a device, a lot of this is happening over the phone. So a digital navigator emphasizes, going back to the three-legged stool analogy / joke, digital navigators emphasizes the digital literacy piece of that three-legged stool. Specifically in training, we're highlighting phone technical support. So a digital navigator is someone who's trained to figure out a community member's need through the course of organic conversation and competently guide them towards resources or opportunities that fits their needs, their digital literacy skill level, and also, most important, their lifestyle. All of this happens over the phone. So for instance, maybe a community member calls in to an organization who has a digital navigator and they say, hey, I need help filing this unemployment application. Pre-COVID, this all could have happened in person. A computer technician would have been able to help over the shoulder to say, like, okay, we're going to this website, click here, click here, click here. Now that this has to happen over the phone, there's a lot more nuance and a lot more guidance that needs to happen here. So NDIA is in the process of supporting several different versions of this digital navigator model. Everything that we learn from our working group and also from all of these pilots, we put on the Digital Navigators website. A few versions of digital navigators that have taken place so far. NDIA has worked with the Local Initiative Support Corporation, Rural LISC, and the emphasis with that digital navigators pilot was on Appalachia. 9 community-based organizations across Appalachia had hired on digital navigators, and they were working to figure out, okay, how do we address economic development in these rural distressed communities? Another version of digital navigators that NDIA is currently supporting is with a grant funded by the Institute of Museum and Library Services to support the Salt Lake City Public Library and 3 other smaller community-based organizations in Salt Lake City to do what we're referring to as like sort of like the public library version of digital navigators. Salt Lake City Public Library identified distressed neighborhoods in Latinx communities across the city, and then worked with community-based organizations who serve those communities, and are now working with a small cohort of digital navigators to offer this tech support. We're also supporting a workforce development program in Ohio that has emphasis on older adults, 55 and plus. So again, this is like a variation on the type of work that this very flexible idea of a digital navigator can be. We designed this to be all replicable. Everything that is on the website, we want you to use, right? We want you to be able to access that and say, okay, these are sort of like the templates, and then this is how I can build off of this. This is how I can learn from what other folks are doing. And NDIA is happy to support in whatever way we can, because we want to build out this community and make it stronger, and figure out all of those best practices.
Yeah, Paulo, how do you visualize the digital divide? What data do you use to inform your work?
Yeah, this is a really great question, because so one of the components of that digital navigators training is an exercise that I call visualizing the digital divide, in which we take a research area. It's usually going to be on whatever community we're working with at that point. So Salt Lake City, for instance, and we pull data from the American Community Survey, as well as the FCC's Form 77 data set to visualize the digital divide. When working with the American Community Survey, for instance, it really comes down to knowing which categories, or for those of you who are data people, like which tables to look for. Tables that are of interest to us in the digital inclusion world are tables that look at like the number of devices in the home, or internet subscription rates in a home. When NDIA is working to do bigger reports, such as like the digital redlining report that I was talking about earlier, we're pulling that data that looks at broadband subscription rates and devices in the home, and we're comparing it with other categories such as race, poverty rate, and median household income to figure out, and I think Sean mentioned this, if there is a relationship between all of those categories. It's not that big of a surprise, but usually there is a relationship. So when we, like as Angela was mentioning, when we talk about adoption, broadband adoption, what we're referring to is the idea that the wires are in the ground, ISPs have built out the infrastructure for communities to have internet, but who isn't adopting, and why aren't they adopting? What is the relationship there? It's usually income based, right? Like people are unable to afford home broadband service. Therefore, even though the wires are right there, they can't pay for it. So therefore, they got to use the public library. They got to use the public computer center, or they need to figure out like a hotspot situation. A tool that we love in our community is a tool called Internet as Infrastructure. It's called the i3 tool, made by a friend of NDIA named Bob Balance, who's at the Center for Internet as Infrastructure. This free tool, which is available on that website that Miles just dropped in, you just register a free username, and you can use this tool, which again pulls on American Community Survey data, pulls on Form 477 data to help you visualize the disparities of broadband adoption in any given city or neighborhood or county or state, whatever research area you want to look at. Visualizing this data is so important because you can pull together those interesting research questions that Sean was referring to earlier, right? Like, is there a relationship between income level and broadband adoption? Pulling together that data, knowing where it is also, and then being able to use tools to visualize that helps you first inwardly demonstrate like, okay, this is a problem, but it also helps if you want to demonstrate like the digital divide to maybe some external stakeholders in your communities. So if you are not a data person, right, like I recommend using that i3 tool because it's awesome. But if you already have a data person, or if you have maybe found a partner, maybe in like a local university, the data page on the NDIA website will refer you, will refer you to the specific tables in the American Community Survey that NDIA likes to use. So back to you, Michaela.
Miles, let's pivot. What digital inclusion efforts are currently happening at the local and state level?
Yes, of course. So as I mentioned earlier, we have our state pages and our local pages. However, NDIA also has something else called our Trailblazers page. And for the second time, I am going to share my screen with you to better describe what I'm talking about. Share. All right, so you should be able to see my screen. NDIA's Digital Inclusion Trailblazer page is essentially an honor roll call of digital inclusion efforts by its applicants, sponsored, of course, by Google Fiber. Thank you. We have 6 indicators through which we look at the inclusion, at the efforts being made by these applicants, namely being whether the local government directly funds staff, whether there's a digital inclusion plan present, whether there's representation on part of the local government, whether the local government has conducted or plans to conduct and publish survey research, whether there is funding for digital inclusion programming, and whether the local government is taking steps to increase affordability of home broadband service. Now, if we scroll down further, we can see the current trailblazers that are present on this page. And one of my colleagues either will or has dropped the link into the chat. The fantastic thing about this page is it can be also used as a reference point, a source of information and knowledge. You'll see that each of these applicants has a drop-down menu attached to it. So if I go to I don't know, New York City, shout out Paulo. We can drop that city down and have a look at the resources that they have provided. If I'm interested in how they accomplish certain tasks, I can click on their internet master plan, which would relate to indicator 2, and it will take me to the New York City internet master plan that I can then use if I want to accomplish something similar within my own community. And so this really is a fantastic resource to use. Let me stop sharing my screen there. I also need to mention that these indicators through which inclusion efforts are measured are not solely as a result of work by NDIA, but rather collaboration between NDIA team members as well as the Trailblazer applicants themselves. This is a collaboration of what best suits these indicators with regards to the applicants as well as those who wish to make use of the documentation. As I mentioned, all documentation for each indicator is published on the NDIA site under those drop-down menus. And this also serves as an avenue to let others know of current state or rather current local digital inclusion efforts and at what level. So the strategic plans are a huge and very popular resource for others looking to achieve something similar. And yes, all of these are very easily accessible and available without need to talk to the NDIA team. You can just go onto our website. However, that does not mean that we don't want to engage directly with you. So that kind of leads me into what would be our next question of how would someone engage with NDIA? And I believe Sabrina has an answer to that particular question.
Yes. First, a little bit about the why. Like, we know, of course, that the field is rapidly expanding. We know that we're looking for inspiration from each other and a sense of, hey, we're doing this together as a movement. But also at the brass tacks, we know that funders and news media go through our lists of affiliates and the blogs sharing what people are doing, that some of them are on our listserv, etc. We want to help them. We want to help with them finding you, right? So we need to make you more visible to each other and to them. But of course, we also share models that are working, like we're this bridge to policymakers and the general public. So there's lots going on there. We organize this in Friday community calls, the very active listserv. The Friday community calls, I should say, those are an hour, usually have 2 to 3 speakers, like 5-minute presentation, no slides, just talking about what the project is. And then we do like a 10 to 15-minute Q&A on that. We do subscriber calls. Subscribers are on a sliding scale. And the subscriber calls just have more detailed, possibly a little bit more, dare I say, like insider information. Angela, is that a good way to frame that? Yeah, it's kind of more insider things that we can say to a smaller group of people. We have the ever exciting subscriber trivia hour. This week, Miles has written the trivia questions / jokes, as I call them, like they're questions and jokes, but a way for us to just have fun together and also learn a few things about digital inclusion. And then subscribers also get working group priority. So we do a lot of this work in working groups because we're, building with field knowledge. So we've got the join link for NDIA that explains all the different ways to join. But you can always just join for free to see the listserv, get the newsletter, just be in touch. That's, I think, the most important part.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Sabrina and Miles. So we're going to shift into Q&A. I see a couple of questions already from Patrick and Sarah. Angela, let's start off with Patrick's question, really around FCC availability data and the definition of broadband.
Yeah, so a quick kind of, before we get into that, is that NDIA really focuses on the affordability of the infrastructure, by being able to purchase a broadband subscription, the digital literacy, and the devices. We have friends and partners who focus on the availability, so we tend not to be, we don't worry about being experts in that. Let's say it that way. So yes, the FCC has a problem with their availability data. No, there's no real solution to that. Some of the states have created their own solution to that. If you are looking for more information about availability, we are not your answer, but we can point you to other folks if you want to talk to other folks. Regarding the definition of broadband, ongoing problem. FCC currently says 25 down, 3 up. Again, this is not an issue that we're going to dig into. We're not going to do a lot of public policy work around it. We will support our friends who say, look, 25.3 is not enough. We totally get that. But our focus is really on the most vulnerable members of our community and making sure that they have the access and being able to use these tools as we've described. And then we work with our partners and our friends out there who focus on the other aspects, sharing information from them, signing on to letters, things like that. Question from Heather in the chat, finding out about availability in their area. Paula, would you grab the link for the both the I3 and the FCC's availability map? The FCC's availability information is in that I3 tool. We like the I3 tool because you can throw on income data and broadband adoption data. So a quick reminder to everyone what Sabrina was explaining about availability versus adoption. So their availability is, do we have internet infrastructure in this area? And sometimes it's not just a yes or no anymore. The answer might be yes, but it's satellite and that's expensive and it's not very good. It kind of comes in and out. So even a yes answer is like, is it really yes? But then the adoption question is, well, the infrastructure is there. Are people purchasing it? So maybe there is really fast internet, but if it's $70-some a month, well, that's good for some people, but it's not good for everybody. So that's more the adoption question. Throw in the digital literacy, which we know is a barrier for a good number of the members of our community. Then there's 2 main reasons, like if the infrastructure is available, but people aren't subscribing, it's probably because it's too expensive or because they just don't know how to use it. Back to you, Michaela.
Yeah, there's another question from Sarah. Are there organizations that have measured the effectiveness of the different strategies used to promote digital equity? And I think that that's a good question for you to address, Angela.
Sure. So digital inclusion prior to the pandemic, there wasn't much money for it, which is a big reason NDIA got started, because we thought the work was really important, and a lot of really important work is happening at the local level, but they still don't have enough financial resources to do it. That includes enough money for evaluation. So no, there's not a lot of good evaluation research out there because there hasn't been any money for it. So we very much encourage trying to wrap that into grant proposals and convincing folks that there should be evaluation money for the program itself. Not to say, should we even do a broadband adoption program? The answer is yes, right? It's more like, okay, well, what's the exact way that we can get at the solution? So that's the evaluation that we need, not does it even matter if people have internet or not. The ones that are out there that we know of are Tech Goes Home. So they are one of the largest financially stable, impacting lots of folks, and they're based in Boston. And they are gathering data from all the folks they serve in order to have those metrics. Another one that's a longitudinal study that we like to point folks to was done by Connected Insights about the work in Cleveland. And so we'll dig up that link and share it also. Michaela?
Yeah, perfect. That's all for our webinar. Feel free to ask more questions, insert them in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourselves, and we're happy to address any questions that are remaining.
As we wait, I would just like to say that we would love for you to become part of our digital inclusion community here at NDIA. The link that Sabrina had popped into the chat earlier is where you can do that. Be our friend. We love our friends. You get access to the listserv, you get access to the NDIA newsletter, as well as becoming part of the discussion of 1,000+ people, I believe, now on our listserv. And this is all talk of cutting-edge developments in the digital inclusion realm. There are also options to be an affiliate.
Hi, Peter.
Sorry, Gretchen, please go for it.
Oh, hi.
Continuing, access to the listserv as an affiliate, access to the newsletter, as well as a listing on the NDIA site as an affiliate, as well as an official NDIA affiliate badge. And then we have a third option, which is a paid option. If you want to become a subscriber, financially support a good fight. Being a subscriber also gives you access to the monthly subscriber calls, as well as having a sliding scale, which means that it's not a one size fits all with regards to the financial obligation, but rather a payment based on the proportional income of your organization. I will drop my email in the chat, as well as re-add that link. If you have any questions with regards to how to join NDIA, if you're not sure of something, if you need more information, I am available. Please do not hesitate to contact me.
I'm going to go ahead and put Miles's email on blast real quick. So this is our first Digital Inclusion 101 webinar. If there are topics you wish we would have discussed, but we did not get to them, please go ahead and email Miles your suggestions, and we will, get them together for next month as well. So we are a community-based organization, and we would love our community's input.
I've also noticed a few questions about whether or not the links in the chat will be available. Yes, they will. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on the NDIA site within, Caitlin, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe 24 hours. It allows us time to download and then upload it. But again, if there are any questions you feel that we have not answered, please, by all means, don't hesitate to email me.
Perfect. I see a really great question in the chat box from Heather, and she's asking, are there any grants still available for public libraries at this time to help fund these kinds of initiatives? And I think, yeah, this is great. Angela, feel free to address.
Yeah, that's perfect, Heather. In fact, that makes me think we should make sure we address funding, right? That's because it's always the, okay, tell me where the money is kind of question. For digital inclusion in general, as I unfortunately mentioned earlier, there's just not a lot of money right now, but we're working on that. That's one of the reasons we exist, is to help find money for you all. And what the big possibility that's out there really is that COVID relief bill. So in addition to the money that would be delivered via state block grants, is also money for IMLS to do more of what they did during the CARES Act, which is money for digital inclusion. So IMLS is definitely the biggest source for libraries around digital inclusion. Their current director came from Kansas City, which has been doing digital inclusion work. The library is a leader there in digital inclusion work. So we've been very excited to see how much focus the IMLS is currently putting on digital inclusion. Back to you, Michaela.
Perfect. Does anybody else have any more questions? We have a few minutes remaining. We could probably get another question in until we can kind of wrap up.
I just want to make sure to mention that on Friday's community call, we will be discussing the COVID relief bill. So federal money that is quite large will be discussed on Friday. And then we will also be talking about a community-based tech helpline out of Louisville, Kentucky.
All righty, everyone. Thanks so much for joining our first Digital Inclusion 101 webinar. I encourage everyone to check out our Net Inclusion 2020 webinar recordings to learn more about topics. We have racial equity and digital inclusion. We have topics around local government, digital equity strategies, digital inclusion strategies, models, and coalitions. And I'll be sure to include that link in the chat.
Thank you, everyone.